pastor. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for bringing us back healthy. Lord, for just rising from the dead and giving us just an assurance of your love for all eternity. No matter what we feel, no matter what trials we go through, Lord, seeing you on that cross is all that we need to know that your love and your, Lord, genuine, long-lasting care for us has been sealed and will never fade. We just worship you, Lord. Open up our hearts and our minds tonight as we begin to talk about culture shock and the things that happen to us as you send us into the mission field. We thank you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, tonight our topic is culture shock. This is our 8th class out of 15, and it is March 29th. And I'm excited about tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about the different ways that all people, this isn't, experienced and non-experienced, this isn't local or international, all people experience some kind of culture shock. When they do that, they go through a physical shutdown and a mental shutdown, as well as, with that, a spiritual shutdown. So think of culture shock as overload. You guys have all used a PC computer before? And as you're typing, all of a sudden the blue screen pops up, right? That's what I'm talking about. It's like this physical, spiritual, emotional blue screen. You think everything's going great, and something inside triggers that you didn't know about, that you weren't prepared for, and all of a sudden everything just stops working. That's what culture shock is. Now, certain people have it on major levels. Other people have it on smaller levels or in a smaller quantity. But everybody experiences it one way or another. In tonight's stories, I'm going to give you the most extreme. So I'm not going to give you all of the gentle culture shocks. Like you go to England and you experience this kind of what I'll call culture adjustment. You'll still go through it. It's still challenging. I'm not downplaying that. I'm just saying tonight, I'm going to give you the worst of the worst so that when you're going through something cross-culturally, you'll say, if that could have happened to that person in the book or Rob's teaching or whatever, then I can handle what I'm going through now. So I'm not going extreme just for shock value. I'm going extreme so that you know that all things are possible through Christ who gives me strength. And that's just what it comes down to. So we're going to be moving quickly tonight. A lot of stories I want to cover, a lot of things I want to share, so I don't want to delay. And so we're not going to do the review of the book. We're just going to get right into it. And then my last little warning is there's going to be graphic stories with graphic content. And so the most graphic photo I have is going to go on the screen for about 5 seconds so that you can understand it, see it, and then I'm going to bring it off the screen, because if I leave it up there while I'm explaining it, you'll get sick to your stomach and you'll have to leave the class, because that's how difficult culture shock can be. Now remember, as I'm telling you this story, we lived it. And it wasn't just me, it was my wife and the rest of our team. We were there for 8 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours at a time dealing with these kinds of things. So I'm going to give it to you for 5 seconds just so that you can see it and then bring it back. But just know this, if you have to close your eyes, if you have to get up and take a walk and get a drink of water, that's totally fine. I would rather have you take a little break than get sick. But I want you to understand what culture shock can truly be like. So we talk about culture shock. The first thing is you'll be in a situation and you'll be looking around and you'll be thinking, where am I? Who am I? How in the world did I get here? And when I found this photo, this is not my family, it looks just like my daughter, but it's not my daughter. When I found this photo on the internet, I said, that's exactly what culture shock is like. Here's this person, this American missionary, even if they're just a young child, entering into this new world, looking at the people, trying to figure out why they are that color, why they look and dress and talk the way that they do. Why are they so different? And why do I feel so isolated? Do you get that from the photo? Why are they so different? And why do I feel so isolated? Now, the great part about this being a picture of a child is culture shock starts off when you enter a new culture and you think, because you're normally a leader, you're normally educated, almost all of us are well into our adult life, and we enter this new culture and we have no idea what's going on. And the reality that we could be that ignorant, that naive, that we could be in a situation and not even be able to discern what's right and wrong creates what I call the first part of culture shock. It's called identity crisis. Who am I? And how did I get here? How in the world would God call somebody like me into a world like this, knowing that when I get here I'm going to be so confused that I'm going to feel like a child? You see, God raises up leaders of all levels, not just senior pastors, if you think of it that way, or let's say business owners, however you want to, categorize leadership in the world that you've lived in. God raises up people that are able to make decisions, that are able to go places, and to really make an impact. That's what a leader is. A leader is one that brings influence. So you go out with this passion to influence, you go out with this passion to make a change, to make a difference, and then you're staring at the people and you realize, when I try to say hello, even the children laugh at me. That's the beginning of culture shock. When I try to discern what to dress like to fit in, I always look totally off. And if I finally start to dress like them, I'll feel when I look in the mirror like I'm so mixed match, I won't even feel confident going outside. You guys know how big we are in fashion. I don't know if you've grappled with the reality, but rich Americans are big on their style. Don't tell somebody that has this style to dress in this style. We have hundreds of styles in our country, but each one of us has a unique style. So we lose our ability to think. We lose our ability to know how to fit in, and then the people, what do? They just openly laugh at us. You remember last week when I said if you travel abroad in the next 6 months, be ready for somebody to laugh at you simply because Donald Trump is on the TV and that's what everybody thinks an American is this guy Donald Trump. They're going to laugh at you. They'll laugh at you all day. And so this picture to me was total perfection captured in an image of what culture shock truly looks like and what it makes you feel like. Now, culture shock defined. What truly is it? I have defined culture shock. There's many ways you can define it. I've defined it in a simplistic form of losing the ability to think clearly or rationally. I know I'm in culture shock when I lose the ability to think clearly or rationally. There's a lot more complicated ways to say that, but I think that's what defines it. Most people, short, long-term, mid-term, it depends on how long you're out, will go through this in a certain stage. And so you have to ask yourself, now that I'm in this situation, now that I'm in this country, am I thinking as normal as I did before I came? Do my thought processes and my heart and my times in the Word, my times in prayer, do my conversations with my other missionaries that I'm with, are they normal like they were? Or is there something happening in here? And in this new tension, as we've talked about in our cultural training books, within this new tension, this level of crisis that's beginning to rise, am I thinking rationally? Let me give you the best example of irrational thinking that I've experienced in my life. I was in the refugee camp on my first trip. This is a vision tour, we would call it. You would go over for 2 or 3 weeks. You would spend time. You would pray. I think we were there for a month. And we were praying about what to do and where to live and how to work it out. We were meeting with the local church. And I found myself sitting in this mud hut with James Nika, which you guys have met, with my wife and my brother and people that I know, people that I trust. And as I'm sitting there in this hut, all of a sudden, out of the blue, I was struck by this thought that there's a lion outside. And that lion is going to attack me and eat me as soon as I get off my chair. Now, was that rational? Absolutely not. There were 10,000 people in this refugee camp. There would not be a lion anywhere in the area. Why? Because the Sudanese, they're lion killers. So if I would have really thought about it, I would have thought, where did that come from? Why is that so deep in my heart? What's going on? So it all came about, because I didn't realize this was all happening, when my wife got up from this conversation in this mud hut, she started to walk out. And then my brother gets up and James gets up, and I'm sitting there and I'm physically holding on to this little bamboo chairs from these little handmade refugee chairs. I'm holding onto it, scared to death, like a kid on a roller coaster, right? I'm just holding onto it. And James goes, Rob, what's wrong? I'm all, I don't know. And he's like, you were fine 5 minutes ago. I'm all, yeah, but I can't move. And so my wife comes in, she goes, babe, what are you doing? I'm all, there's a lion outside. And she's all, what? Say that again? There's a lion? I'm all, yeah, there's a lion outside. And as soon as I walk out that door, it's going to eat me and kill me. And she's like, what's wrong with you, right? What has happened to you? Here's what happened. In culture shock, when you're about to live somewhere new, You go through all of these things, all these worst case scenarios. Your psychological makeup is fragile. Let me just tell you that, and if you don't know that now, you're going to discover it cross-culturally. You have a fragile psyche. My psyche was all messed up. My thoughts about being there long term, all of the fears were there. So all this is going on in me emotionally and physically. I can't even get out of this chair. I'm so scared. And then what does the enemy do? The enemy knows, and he just feeds the fire. He just pours gasoline on that fire to the point where I was frozen to my chair. There was no lion. There was no danger. There was nothing other than God's call and God's people and an open door to help amazing amounts of people in the next 4 years of my life. But the enemy says, I want to kick you off course right now. I want to make fear so grab you and cripple you, injure you to the point where you can't move forward. That is culture shock. So it's physical, it's spiritual, it's emotional. Now the interesting thing about that is I had a senior pastor come out to visit me 3 years after this story, after my lion story. And as soon as he arrived, now he helped disciple me when I first got saved. He's actually a pastor of a mega church now. I think he has 5,000 members or whatever. So he's a huge leader. When he arrived in the refugee camp, I expected, because of his spiritual maturity, because of his ability to lead in America, that he would be the same there. He gets to the refugee camp, we get him in the hut, with where we're having everybody stay with all these bunk beds and stuff. And he goes, Rob, what's going on? I said, what do you mean what's going on? We're doing great. We're going to have dinner in a couple minutes. Do you want to freshen up and shower or whatever? Here's a cup and a bucket, take a cold shower. And he's like, something in my mind is shutting down. I can barely breathe. And so as I was praying for him, the Lord was saying, he's going through culture shock. He's never been trained. He has no idea what's going on. He's only going to be here for a week or two. He's not going to live the rest of his life here. He went through so much culture shock that night that he couldn't eat. And as I was watching him and recognizing it, now this shocked me because he was my senior pastor. It would be like if Brian Burson, or Chuck Smith or somebody that we know that's a great leader came over somewhere and just imploded psychologically and couldn't talk. So I took my pastor, this isn't my brother, this is another pastor, I took him into the room, I said, here's your bed, here's some headphones with some worship, just lay down and pray. Because the only thing you can do is check out of the scene, don't try to fight through it because you're going to lose it psychologically, and just lay in this bed and just rest. And close your eyes, listen to worship, and imagine yourself back at home. Imagine yourself somewhere else. And then the enemy's lies started to decrease. By the next morning, he was fine. Now, he was a little touchy the rest of the trip. He never came back, needless to say, never ever traveled overseas again like that. But it was shocking to me that a senior pastor of a megachurch could go through the same thing. So long-term missionaries, short-term missionaries, everybody is susceptible to forms of culture shock. Rest and pray. So what are the causes? Now, these are the things that we're reviewing in our books. The causes of culture shock are different concepts of time and schedule. Remember we talked about in America we can get 10 things done in a day. Overseas you might get one thing done in a day, or it might take 2 days. So how long does it take to do it? What do schedules look like? Do people actually work when they show up to work, or do they just talk all day? Temperature and climate. These are all things we've covered in the book. That tropic climate, that extremely hot Sahara Desert climate, that extremely cold, let's say Alaskan climate or Siberian climate. And then judgment, what's right and what's wrong. Judgment, what's right and what's wrong. These things take time to begin to manifest because you don't see these for a while. They're deeper below the surface in that iceberg analogy that we looked at. Goals and feeling successful. What are my goals? And when do I feel successful? You think it's going to be this, and the culture says it's the exact opposite. And as you're living in that culture and you're trying to live up to your own expectations, not the Lord's, your own expectation, you become broken or confused or irrational based on your concepts of your goals and feeling successful. And then vulnerability. Are we vulnerable with these things? I was so glad that Pastor James Nika, being a Sudanese man, could speak perfect English. I mean, for me, it was not perfect English in America, but I understood everything he said. He understood everything I said, and he could state to me very clearly, this is what you're going through, and this is what it looks like. Without that, without him being transparent with me, I might have given up. Now, of course, God could have given me somebody else, but I'll tell you this, a key national to speak into your life about these things is major. Being vulnerable, talking about culture shock. When you don't talk about it, it will cause you to break. It will cause you to shut down, and you won't be useful to the Lord in any way. And so we have to be open, we have to show vulnerability, and we have to be honest. Everyone has a difficulty with showing vulnerability. And then we talked about in our book, handling crisis. When something goes wrong, do the people just sit around and wait for it to be urgent? Do they wait for the house to start on fire before they get the water to put the fire out? I was in the city of Kampala, which is the capital city of the country of Uganda, where I lived, and I noticed a building caught on fire. And then about 20 minutes later, I heard the sirens start up. Now I could see the building, and I could see the only fire station in the country. I could see the fire station, and I could see the building. And I thought, where'd that fire station come from? Oh yeah, the British instituted that, and then they left. But the Africans now run it. So this building is on fire, people are screaming, everybody's running, it's spreading to more buildings, and the fire truck is sitting there with the front end of the truck sticking out of the building, but not going anywhere. So I talked to somebody the next day, and I said, why did it take 20 minutes from the time the fire started till the fire truck started up and drove to the fire and squirted water on it? And they said, because they started to fill up the water in the tank when the fire started. Okay? They don't put the water in the tank before the fire starts. They wait for the fire. Then they turn on the water, hoping that they have water pressure in the city system, and then they fill it up with like a small hose. So they took 20 minutes to fill up the tank. Then they drove over and they put out the fire. How many businesses were burnt down? I don't have any idea. But can you imagine that kind of a world? Handling crisis. Wow, that one threw me for a loop. Totally threw me for a loop. Each person will have different struggles. So when we talk about all of these things, just know this. Not everybody struggles with each one of these things in the same way. My wife had struggles in one way, more emotional, more relational, more spending time with me or spending time with the people. I had no struggles with that at all because I was built like a machine. I wanted to work, I wanted to fix, I wanted to create, I wanted to conquer. My wife wasn't out to build or create or conquer. She wanted to have a relationship. So while I'm struggling over here, she's struggling over there. But neither of us know that there's this cultural fire burning in us that's causing us to overheat. And I think that she should be like me, and she thinks that I should be like her. And before we know it, we're struggling with two different things in the same country. And I think, am I the only one doing this? Because even if my wife doesn't understand me, you know, when your own spouse doesn't understand you, this is when it gets difficult. So each person will struggle uniquely. Now in that, we have to realize that each country is going to be different, each team is going to be different, everything is going to work uniquely. So going back to our saying that we use in every class, the further you go from home, the greater your shock will be. The further you go from your home culture, the greater your shock will be. That's why I bring up England or Canada or somewhere where they speak English and they are Judeo-Christians by nature. You're going to have a little bit of struggle. There's going to be struggle. You have to go through cultural adjustment when you move to another country, no matter what it is. But when you move to Mexico, I would think it's 3 times harder than moving to England. Why? Because it's a new language. It's a whole new mindset. When you go into remote parts of Africa, remote parts of Asia, it's huge levels. If you go into intense Islamic countries, it's going to be even more. So the further you go from home, the greater your culture shock will be. So if you go through massive culture shock in one scenario or another, and then somebody says to you, well, I went to that country and I didn't go through that, don't think you're crazy. Just know that each person struggles in a different way, in a different time. And this was the hard part about being a missions pastor, and I'm speaking to those that will be part of care teams, part of sending people out. If your missions pastor or your care team leader or whoever it is that helps you make decisions doesn't have experience in multiple countries, they'll base all of their judgments upon one experience. But you can't say all missions is a refugee camp, or you can't say all missions is Mexico, or all missions is Russia. Every missions place will be unique, and so we have to see this from a larger perspective. Now, I'm going to show you a video. In this video, I want to ask 3 questions. Is anybody angry in this video? Just as you watch this, I want you to think about it before the video starts. Is anybody angry? The men that are working on the train station, they have the white gloves and the hats and the uniform, are they helping or are they hurting? And if you were one of these people trying to get into this train, would you survive? Okay, so let's watch this video and let's ask these three questions. Is anybody angry? Are they serious? Now, was that helpful, or are they hurting someone? Are any of you claustrophobic? Now, let's imagine I said, here's your train ticket. You're going to go down to the station in China, and you're going to jump on the train out to the village. There's only one train per day, and there's about 6,000 people to fit on a 500-seat train. So is anybody mad at these guys in blue? Now the other question is, how long is this train ride? Yeah. How long is that train ride? And then you ready for the next one? Do they have air conditioning? Does anybody wear deodorant? Right? These are all questions we have to work through. Is there a pickpocket? Because if there's a pickpocket, he's got his hands in your pockets, you don't even know it. Right? That's it, Shane. There was no other way than to show it to you. Was that amazing? How in the world can that be normal in that culture? There are billions of people living like this every day. Now, all of those people were dressed like business people, weren't they? They weren't uneducated. They weren't illiterate. They weren't in some remote part of the world. They were in high-tech China, going to an area that they all needed to get to, but there was only so many trains because there was limited funds and limited public transportation, and people don't own their own vehicles. If they owned their own vehicle, do you think they would take that train? Absolutely not. So let's say God calls you to China, and I hand you a ticket. I'm a Chinese guy. I hand you a ticket and say, just go on the platform, and then everybody will kind of, it'd be a little tight in the train, and just kind of get in. And before you know it, this guy's pushing you, and everybody's up against you. What would you do? You would scream. You would hyperventilate, wouldn't you? Imagine the kind of claustrophobia that would go on in your mind. Oh my, right? Is that for real? Yes, that is a real video of real things. Nobody in that train was angry. Nobody was trying to hurt anybody. This was culturally acceptable. If you were called to this place, this is how you would travel. Oh dear God. Is that for real? Yes. Now, continuing with culture shock analogies, the first time I drove myself in East Africa, which would be Kenya and Uganda and South Sudan area, I had to start to drive on the left-hand side. Now, when your brain is trained to drive on the right-hand side of the street, it means when you enter into the street, you automatically stay to the right. That's just what we do. We stay to the right. When an emergency happens, do we cross over the lanes? No, we pull over to the right, don't we? Right? Everything in your mind is saying, stay right, stay right, stay right. I pull out of the hotel in Uganda. We're going to travel over the mountain to Kenya that morning. As I pull out, of course, it has a roundabout, which means they don't have like four-way stops. They have these roundabouts. As I pull out, it's an early Sunday morning. Nobody's on the street. Nobody's on the roundabout. The first thing I do is go on the roundabout the wrong way. I don't go left. I go right. This huge policeman stands in front of me and says, halt! What am I going to, he's going to arrest me right now. I'm 100 feet in the road on my first time driving. I'm going to jail. And he says, white man, Mzungu, we stay left here. So I had to put it in reverse, do a U-turn in the roundabout, and start going the other way. Now the whole time, everything in my mind is hurting because it's wanting to go right, but I got to stay left, and I want to go right, and I'm staying left, and I find myself veering into the lane the whole time. It was horrible. 8 hours into our trip, I get up behind this huge truck on this mountain road. Now, these trucks aren't like American trucks where they actually get some speed up a mountain, like 35, 40 miles an hour. These guys are doing 5 miles an hour and blowing so much smoke out the back you can't see. So you get up behind them, and I think I'm reading the driver's hand signals correctly. The driver was saying he was doing this. Now, I thought he was saying to me, go ahead and pass, because I couldn't see around him. We're on a windy mountain road. What he was saying was, in America, it would have been like this, right? Don't pass. But he was doing this, which I thought he meant pass. As I start to go around him, I find myself head to head with another Land Cruiser at full speed. Now, he could see the Land Cruiser. I couldn't see the Land Cruiser, all the smoke and his hand signals. So now I'm head to head with this other Land Cruiser, and there's this massive truck. There's nowhere to go. We're on a mountain road. One side drops off into a huge ditch. And as my wife and everybody starts screaming, even the guys in the car are screaming, we hit the brakes, and what's the first thing I do? I pull to one side, because that's where I would pull off. So now, instead of veering around the guy like I should have, if I would have pulled left and he would have pulled right, we both pull right, and we're sliding on the dirt, ready to go over a cliff like this. And my bumper stopped like within an inch of this woman's window, and she's screaming in the passenger seat. Now, she's in a small Toyota like Corolla. I'm in a huge Land Cruiser with a massive metal front end with big bull bar, and she's screaming, Jesus, save me! So there I am like this, looking down at the woman. She's looking up at me. My whole team is losing it. They come flying out the back of the doors like, Rob, you're trying to kill us. And I'm looking at the truck driver, and he's looking at me like, why did you do that? Everybody was in crisis mode. What happened? I was simply driving in a new country. Now in America, I don't get in accidents like that. I'm not a crazy driver. I love driving. But here I was, almost killing my entire team, pushing them off a mountain, and killing an entire family with me simply because I was on the wrong side of the road and I misinterpreted the hand signals. Now, nobody told me, you got to drive this way and they're going to do this and trucks do that. No one said any of those things. It was a horrible, horrible moment. I still have trouble driving on the left. Just so you know, I've been in those countries now for almost 10 years, driving all the time. Every time I do it, I get a headache. Just be ready for it. You get a headache when you drive on the wrong side of the road. When you're going down the road, you see some of the most absurd things that you can imagine. You think, no way, that can't be real. Now, I downloaded these off the internet because I wasn't able to take a photo when I saw these things, but all these things are true. If you're going to live in the Middle East, Africa, and remote parts of Asia, you are going to see vehicles that are loaded 10 times beyond their carrying capacity going down the road. And everybody thinks it's normal. Totally, completely normal. Shocking. I've had to pull over, because a lot of these roads are really thin. I've had to pull over into the trees so that the truck that was overloaded, as it came right down the middle of the road, and it wasn't going to stop for 1 second, I had to pull off the road into the trees, run over some bushes, just to give them enough clearance to pass me up. Now, the same thing happens in, let's say, crossing a ferry or in the water. People in Asia and Africa overload boats so much that these boats will sink. They happen all the time in Lake Victoria, off the coast of Kenya, parts of Asia. People overload these boats so much that entire families, or like neighborhoods, they drowned because a lot of them can't swim, and they'll overload it. So you think, okay, I'm just going to take a nice boat ride from here to there. It's so overloaded you can't even handle it. A friend of mine, Pastor Dave from Calvary, Nairobi, and Audie, another one of our missionary friends, they went on a little boat ride, that was going to be a small boat ride, from the coast of Tanzania across this little lake over to Congo to plant a church with their Congolese student. And they said it took them 12 hours. They went about 5 miles an hour, and the boat was so overloaded it was down in the water where like literally the waves of the lake were like splashing into the boat the whole time, and they just got a little cup shoveling it out, bailing the boat the whole time. How long? 12 hours. They started at sunrise. They didn't arrive until after sunset. Cooking on the equator, cooking in the sun on this lake. Unbelievable. What's interesting about this is a lot of these boats, they'll overload, they'll sink, everybody will die, but nobody will take responsibility for it because they live in a shame and honor culture. And a lot of them in their worldviews will say, it wasn't us overloading the boat and our greed to make more money to put more people on the boat. It was the boat's fault. It was the lake's fault. It was the weather's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And here are entire families killed in the lake, and it's always somebody else's fault. Have you ever been to India and seen the trains? Now, there are more train tracks running now in India than anywhere in the world. Like, I think it was almost 10 years ago that they finally retired the last steam engine train. It was still running in a part of India up in the remote mountains. These people are so used to trains that when I was there, we would get into the train station and it was like billions of people. I'm exaggerating. It was maybe like 4,000 all on one little platform rushing into the train. And then those that couldn't pay for a ticket, where would they go? They'd climb on top. And you're like, this can't be for real. There is no way this is for real. But these are real photos of real scenes that happen all over the world. And then you have the challenge. How much can you fit on a scooter? Can you fit a 1,000-pound pig? Can you fit a 1,000-pound cow that's still alive? You said that white cow? He's alive. He's just back there mooing away as he goes down the road. Can you fit almost 100 full-size geese on the back of your scooter? And the answer is yes, absolutely. These people can do wonders with a little 50cc, which is this little baby motor. It's like as big as like the engine in your lawnmower. They can do wonders with these things. Here's why I'm bringing it up, not just because it's funny. When you're going down the street and you think, Lord, I live here. This is totally insane. There is no way that I actually live in this country. There's no way that the meat that I'm about to eat comes from this thing, comes from this kind of transportation. There is no way this is for real. Now, nobody else is going through culture shock. Everybody else has got a straight face. And what are all the Americans doing? Right? Eyes wide open, mouth hanging open. What in the world? Now, I've got tons of them. Sharks, huge fish. I was just going to leave it with the 3 photos. I had a hard time today narrowing down with that, if you want to go on my Pinterest account, which is myname.com or my ministry name, and then go into galleries, I have, I think, 100 great overloaded shots on our Pinterest account. We have all kinds of other shots, but just on that one board, there's tons of them, so you can see a lot more of those. And then, not just overloaded with stuff, but overloaded with people. When a car is going down the street and the axle's about to break, but nobody cares, you go into shock. When you pull up at a stop sign and you say to one person, I'll give you a ride in the back of my truck, and 50 people get in, and you're feeling your axle. Because remember, none of them own vehicles. They don't understand what it takes to maintain a vehicle. To them, it doesn't matter at all. Just the more of them they can fit in, the better. So I'm watching my truck go, eek, and I'm hearing the thing squeak. And as a mechanic, I know that's going to be thousands of dollars, $5,000, $6,000 of damage. And then they want me to drive down that potholed road with those guys in my car. My car will last like a week. I've gotten angry, which was horrible. Angry, get out of my car. And they're looking at me like, we don't speak English. I'm like, no, you speak, get out, right? You see my thumb? Get out. And I physically was removing people from my car. You let one person in, you let the whole world in. Oh, it's crazy. Now, the picture on the bottom of all those people on the back of that truck, they might travel 500 miles through the Sahara Desert on the back of a truck like that. Many of my Sudanese refugees trying to get back home, that's the way they traveled. So to the Africans that are so poor that there might be one truck every week going across that desert that you can never walk across because there's no water, there's no food, there's no way to physically walk across it. You will die. They'll jump on that truck and they'll be there covered in dust. You can see they have turbans on their heads because of the dust and the sand. To them, that's totally, completely normal. Now, what's the problem with all of these vehicles and all of these moments of culture shock? As soon as the rain comes, it turns those dirt roads into nothing. These monstrous trucks burrow down into those dirt roads and make the place completely impassable. Just recently, this happened. This isn't a photo of our people, but it's right in our same area. The one on the top where the truck is leaning over. This just happened to one of our construction trucks trying to get there. The military came by. They unloaded all of the stuff out of the back. They got this huge winch. They put it back on its 4 wheels or its 8 wheels or however, and then they reloaded everything. Nobody thought anything was wrong. Now, as an American, if the truck was on the side, I'd be losing my mind. To them, they're like, no, this is just normal. Sometimes they fall over. Sometimes they don't. Either way, we're going to get there. The problem with where we work in Sudan is the road that our trucks fall over on is ruled by the rebels. If you're there too long, you're going to get shot. Just yesterday, James Nika was taking his construction supplies out in the rain so he could travel a little faster. And as he was going, a bunch of guys with machine guns came out, held guns to him. This was just yesterday. Jumped in the car and said, take us down to Kenya. They were in Sudan. And he's looking at them realizing these guys are Kenyan. That means they're in Sudan stealing cattle from my Sudanese people, and now they forced me by gunpoint to take them across the border into Kenya. If I get caught by the Kenyan police, I'm going to get arrested with them for cattle thieving, and if my people catch me, they'll kill me because that's what they do to cattle thieves. So James texted me and goes, Rob, they were in my car for like an hour. We got down the road. Praise the Lord, it didn't rain and we didn't get stuck. I saw that we were right at the border and I dropped them off and said, you guys get out of here because I can't be found with you in my car. They ran away. An hour later, James is in the town and he hears gunfire and then gets word later that the Kenyans and the Sudanese went to war with each other. The guys that were in his car went to war with the people that they were stealing from, and people were killed. He was literally within moments of getting shot at. And this is the kind of road that he has to travel on just to get the construction supplies. Now the picture of the Land Cruiser, that's just for fun. That's because every time it rained, this would happen to us. We would spend 45 minutes traveling 7 miles on a dry day. Okay, when it was dry, 45 minutes to go 7 miles. You guys know how far 7 miles is? You can almost see it if you look down the road. 45 minutes going up and down the potholes. As soon as it rained, it was like monsoons, it would flood, and our car would sink. And I could always remember my wife just sitting in the front seat, okay, honey, do you want me to run the winch? And I'm like, yeah. So I'd go crawl out with either my Tiva sandals or these big rubber boots. I'd crawl out in the mud, I'd connect the thing to the winch, I'd give her the controller so she's sitting in the car with the window barely cracked because it's still raining, and I would grab the cable and she would release it, and I would walk out sometimes and find just a bush to connect the winch to pull this out because there's not trees everywhere. So you're on the ground finding a bush that's big enough to you to wrap the cable around, and so I'm literally crawling in the mud with this thing and I'm saying, okay honey, run the car, and then somebody else jump in and you try to get the 4-wheel drive moving and I'll keep the cable here and you get the winch going, and it's this huge ordeal 2, 3, 4 times just to get from the main road to our house every time it rained. That creates massive tension, massive culture shock. Now I'm just talking about driving. You guys are with me on that? We're not talking about doing anything else right now. We're just driving. We're not talking about eating or language learning, just driving. When you're in Asia, there are more people than you can imagine. These roads are so packed. Now many of these roads in Asia, this would be the downtown areas where they all come together. And remember, there's no master planning in most of Asia. This has been developing for thousands of years. So the roads are like this big, and there's like 100 of them pointing in on one little roundabout, and so everybody jams in. There was a time when I was in Sri Lanka during the tsunami, doing outreach and helping people, and a friend of mine in Africa got in a car accident and killed somebody. It was an accident, but I had to go there to get him out of prison, and so I had to leave the east coast of Sri Lanka, travel over the mountain, it's a big volcano, travel over the mountain to the west coast to get to the airport. For 12 hours we drove in a little taxi. The guy honked every minute for 12 hours. Honk, honk, honk. Okay, I want to keep going so you get irritated. Honk, 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 honk. And it sounded like the horn wasn't in the engine compartment. It sounded like the horn was right at my feet. Honk, honk, 12 hours. Now after the first half an hour, I'm starting to lose it, right? No, I'm here to preach the gospel. This man's a Buddhist. He's never heard the gospel in his life, and I want to make a good impression. Honk, 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 honk. And we're weaving in and out. We never went faster than 20 miles an hour for 12 hours, and he never stopped honking. The whole time, it was like it was part of his routine. Like a clock going click, click, he would honk, honk. Oh, I was losing my mind. Then, as you're going down the road, you realize that even in some of the most advanced Asian countries, they still have ox-drawn carts. So how fast does an ox go? You guys ever seen an ox go down the road? And a guy whipping the ox? How fast does it go? When it wants to cross in front of you, how long are you going to be there? A long time. Well, hey, here's this old Sri Lankan guy. He doesn't want to buy a car. He doesn't want to get a driver's license. He's got his ox, the ox that his grandfather taught him how to operate when he was a little kid, and now he's an old guy, so he gets his firewood, he puts it on there, and he just goes down the road. So you got bicycles, motorcycles, kids, and ox-drawn carts in the middle of these cities. This is why we never get beyond 20 miles an hour for 12 hours. Then, when your only source of transportation for you and your family is a tuk-tuk, which are these little bitty three-wheeled, they're like glorified motorcycles with a shell over them. They look like a little tic-tac going down the road. And the guy's got this little motorcycle steering wheel all the way through traffic, and you're thinking, okay, we've been living here for 6 months. 6 months, and because I'm not a citizen, I can't rent something, and I can't do all this stuff, and we have very little limited income, and we're already living 10 times richer than the local people, but this is how my family gets around. And remember, it's tropic. You're sweating the entire time, and all the dust is coming in, and there's cow droppings everywhere, and there's kids all over the place, and you're just like, this is insanity. Total, complete insanity. Look at my wife back there with my son. He was like 6 months old. You know what a 6-month-old kid is like on a thing like that? He's trying to jump out of it. There's no car seats in these little things. So what does my wife have to do? She has to wear him. She has to wear him on herself to even keep him from jumping out of this cool little thing. Now, to kind of just put a conclusion on traveling, when you're on a 12-hour car ride in the tropics, what are you doing? You're drinking a lot of water, aren't you? Or soda, whatever you can find to drink, because you can't always get clean water. So what do you have to do every few hours? And there are no toilets. Absolutely not. Everywhere you go in Africa and most parts of Asia, there are those open, we call them, remember, the long drops, the pit latrines. And what do you find in there? Friends. Friends. So you're in this huge car ride and you just can't handle it. It's just totally gross. Here, I'll change the picture so it doesn't make you sick. You can't even handle it, and you're driving along and you're thinking, okay, I just want to get out of this car. I want to stop the honking. I want to not be going 20 miles an hour when I could go a lot faster. I always want to rest. Well, you know what? I really have to go to the bathroom. And you go find the bush, and you have no idea what's in the grass, snakes and kids peering in on you and whatever else. You go into these places and you try to use the restroom, and as soon as you shimmy down on that little long drop, the cockroaches come up your legs. And you're like, I can't take it anymore. That's why I added the picture. I can't take it anymore. Now, all we've done is go from point A to point B. You guys follow me on that? We haven't done anything special. We haven't done any ministry. We've just been driving. That's all we've done. We've almost killed everybody. We've been in massive culture shock. We're like, this can't be for real. There's no way I'm here. Now, signs of culture shock. What are the true signs of culture shock? Losing my ability to think clearly. This is taking us back to our original definition. Losing my ability to think clearly. Irrational thoughts. You remember the story that we told about the Asian girl that was a foreign exchange student, and she was living with that host family, and she noticed the host family, in a sense, in her eyes, cared for the dog more than the children. Now, the family didn't do that, but that's the way that she saw it. Those are irrational thoughts. The story of myself and the lion, totally irrational. They are not true, but this is how we know culture shock is beginning to sneak up on us. Total irrational thoughts. And then we start to isolate ourselves. This is the big sign. This is when you know yourself or somebody on your team is going through culture shock and you need to intervene. When somebody starts to isolate themselves and they start to say, no one understands me. No one understands me. I'm the only one going through this. When you have that thought in your mind, or when you hear somebody else say it, just know this. Culture shock is beginning to creep up on them. It could be overwhelming, like my situation with the lion where I couldn't move and everybody else was fine, but I couldn't move. That was my own deal. That came on me like a ton of bricks. It just fell on me and it overtook me. For other people, it's slow and steady. And when people start to isolate and say no one else understands, that's when you know culture shock is setting in. Be very careful of isolating. Isolating is the worst thing you can do. This is when you need other missionaries, especially those that have lived there for more than 2 years. Notice that? More than 2 years. You might have a great short-term team member or a short-term team leader that's seen these things, but what you really need is someone that's lived there for a long time, and you can say to them, what was it like for you when you first came? Did everything shock you? Like getting from the house to the airport, getting from the house to the grocery store? Did everything shock you? And they would say, yes, absolutely. Well, what happened? Well, I went through all of these things. The only way to deal with this is to talk it out. Pray, listen to worship, spend time, and talk it out. The third sign of culture shock starting to set in is when everything becomes an emergency. Everything becomes a total, complete emergency. This is when you will start to do things that you would never imagined you would have done in your rational mind. There was a time, and I think I might have shared this in the first level course, there was a time where we had an African doctor. I might have even shared earlier in this course. And the African doctor came from the city to the refugee camp to work with our African refugees that were coming from a very remote area. So you have an African man that spoke 7 languages, like fluently. He got his doctorate degree in Chinese. So he was born in Uganda, had a local dialect, learned to speak Lugandan, learned to speak English, was studying French at the moment, moved to China to get his doctorate degree in medicine and learned Mandarin and Cantonese. So this guy was beyond brilliant. I've never met a guy so brilliant in my life. And he said, you know what, I can make a lot of money being a doctor anywhere in the world, but this is my home. This is where God put me. I want to do ministry. I was paying him like $50 a day. Like, but doctors get that in a minute in America. $50 a day. He had a heart of servant. He had a servant's heart, is what I say. I hate that coin phrase, but he was a servant. He loved the Lord. He loved to serve people. He went through so much culture shock working in my refugee camp that he one day was so frustrated with the mothers, because the mothers would bring their children in after they would take their kids to the witch doctor, and I'm going to show you photos of this later. Those are the shocking images. After the mothers would take their children to the witch doctor would abuse the kids and cut them and do all this crazy sick stuff to them. Then they would bring the kids into the medical clinic. Dr. Shadrach one day said, to these mothers, if you bring your child in and that child's been cut by the witch doctor, I will take my scalpel and I will cut you. Now, I didn't know this was going on. He'd been working for me for a whole year. In the beginning, he was like, Rob, this is going to be awesome. We're going to get together. We're going to do ministry. I can learn this language. I'm going to be like a pastor doctor to these people. You be a pastor to the Bible college students, all pastor doctor. We were together in this. And one day, he started to break down so much that a lady came in for the 3rd or 4th time after she took her child to the witch doctor, and the witch doctor had cut the child's skin and done all this horrible stuff to it, that Shadrach got so mad, he picked up his scalpel and he just cut her right across the chest, just like filleted her wide open. Now, when he did it, he freaked. In his mind, he was like, what did I just do? Did that just really happen? He literally got up and he ran from the clinic because he realized what he had done. He gets to my place. Some of the Sudanese I worked for said, Rob, Shadrach tried to kill a lady, so all the people in the community are going to try to kill him. You got to get him out of here. And I'm sitting here thinking, what is going on? This day started out great. We're going through the book of Romans. Everything's fine. And now all of a sudden, there's a mob trying to kill my doctor that's been serving them for all this time. What happened when Shadrach finally sat in my car? He goes, Rob, I didn't realize that I was susceptible to culture shock. I went into culture shock, everything became an emergency, and I was so angry with these witch doctors and these parents that I thought the only way to stop this is to cut the parents. And he goes, I'm totally losing my mind. I had to find a road that I'd never known existed through a little cow pasture area to get Shadrach off the compound to the main road and out of the area. He never could come back, because if he would have come back, they would have killed him. He went there to serve. He was a national. He understood the people. That's why I brought him in. I didn't bring in a white doctor. White doctors would have no idea what they're doing. But Shadrach became so culturally confused that he said, it's an emergency and I've got to do this. Now, that's just an extreme example. There are hundreds of examples where you think, if this doesn't change right now, I can never live here. I got to do something about it now. When somebody goes into this emergency state, you know that culture shock is beginning to set in. Be very careful. All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to start looking at some key scriptures to keep culture shock down to a minimum.